The courtroom was packed, tension thick in the air as reporters and spectators filled every available seat. The case had drawn national attention, not just because of the high-profile defendant but because of what had unfolded in previous hearings. Maxwell Harrington, a billionaire mogul known for his real estate empire and unchecked arrogance, sat at the defendant's table, his face impassive, arms crossed. The moment Judge Denise Caldwell entered the courtroom, every person in attendance rose from their seats, except for him. Judge Caldwell, an esteemed African-American jurist with decades of legal experience, had faced her share of challenges in her career. But nothing prepared her for the blatant disrespect Maxwell displayed. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, in a voice that carried quiet authority, she addressed him. "Mr. Harrington, I take it you are unfamiliar with courtroom decorum?" Maxwell smirked, leaning back in his chair. "I'm familiar, Your Honor," he said smoothly. "I just don't stand for people I don't respect." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even his own defense attorneys looked momentarily stunned before quickly masking their expressions. Prosecutor Jordan Mitchell, who had been preparing to present his case, narrowed his eyes. Judge Caldwell's expression didn't change. If she was angered, she didn't show it. Instead, she reached for her gavel, tapping it lightly. "Bailiff, ensure Mr. Harrington understands the rules of my courtroom." The bailiff, a burly officer who had served for over 20 years, stepped forward, his voice firm. "Sir, I strongly advise you to stand." Maxwell chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't take orders." Judge Caldwell sighed, her voice remaining steady. "Very well. Mr. Harrington, you are now in contempt of court. Bailiff, escort him out until he is ready to comply." Two officers approached, but Maxwell raised his hands in mock surrender, standing abruptly. "Fine. I'll stand. Happy now?" Judge Caldwell met his gaze without blinking. "Not at all, Mr. Harrington. Your actions speak volumes, but I will not allow your arrogance to disrupt these proceedings. Sit." Maxwell sat down, his smirk returning. But he had underestimated Judge Caldwell. Throughout the trial, his wealth and influence had shielded him from true accountability, but in her courtroom, his money meant nothing. The trial proceeded, with the prosecution painting a damning picture of his financial misdeeds, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy charges that could land him in prison for decades. But it wasn't just the legal battle unfolding that had captivated the nation. It was the quiet, powerful stance of Judge Caldwell, a woman who had spent her career breaking barriers and demanding respect in a system often stacked against her. And it was Maxwell Harrington, a man so accustomed to privilege that he had never been forced to acknowledge the authority of someone like her. As the trial wore on, the public discourse around the case grew heated. News outlets dissected the racial and social implications, debating whether Maxwell's refusal to stand was merely arrogance or something more insidious. Pundits argued, op-eds were written, and protests formed outside the courthouse. Some rallied in support of Judge Caldwell, while others defended Maxwell, claiming his actions were nothing more than a rebellious stance against authority in general. But the moment of reckoning came during closing arguments. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision, showing the jury undeniable evidence of Maxwell's corruption. His defense, despite being among the best money could buy, struggled to counter the mountain of proof against him. And as the jury deliberated, Maxwell sat with the same smug expression, as if convinced his wealth would rescue him once again. When the verdict was read, the world held its breath. Guilty. Maxwell's smirk finally faltered. The reality of the moment seemed to hit him all at once. Judge Caldwell remained composed as she delivered his sentence, 25 years in federal prison. As she spoke, Maxwell clenched his jaw, his usual bravado slipping away. But before he was taken away, Judge Caldwell looked him in the eye one last time. "Respect isn't something you demand, Mr. Harrington. It's something you earn. And your wealth does not make you immune to justice." As he was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Some called it justice, others saw it as the fall of another powerful man who had assumed he was untouchable. But for Judge Denise Caldwell, it was just another day in the pursuit of fairness, a pursuit she had never abandoned, no matter the obstacles in her path. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy continued. Maxwell's supporters decried the verdict as an attack on the wealthy elite, while his critics saw it as long overdue accountability. The case set off a wave of discussions on social media, prompting debates on race, privilege, and the justice system. In prison, Maxwell struggled to adjust. Gone were the luxuries he had once taken for granted. His arrogance made him few friends among inmates, and even the guards treated him with a cold indifference. For the first time in his life, he was just another number, stripped of power and influence. Meanwhile, Judge Caldwell's reputation soared. She became a symbol of integrity, a figure admired across the nation for her unwavering commitment to justice. Interviews and speaking engagements followed, but she remained focused on her work, knowing that Maxwell's case was just one of many in a system that still had far to go. Months passed, and Maxwell's appeals were denied one after another. He watched from his cell as his empire crumbled, his assets seized, his name dragged through the mud. The world moved on, but he remained trapped in the consequences of his own arrogance. And in that cold, gray cell, Maxwell Harrington finally began to understand the lesson Judge Caldwell had tried to teach him, that respect, true respect, could never be bought. Years passed, and Maxwell's name faded from the headlines. Judge Caldwell continued to preside over high-profile cases, her influence growing even further. She became an inspiration for young law students, particularly black women who saw in her the embodiment of resilience and strength. Her legacy became one of unwavering justice, proving that no amount of wealth or privilege could outweigh the rule of law. Maxwell, now an aging man with graying hair, sat in his prison cell, flipping through an old newspaper that bore Judge Caldwell's face. He no longer smirked. His hands trembled slightly as he traced her image, the weight of his past mistakes crushing him. For the first time in his life, he felt something foreign, regret. But regret would not save him from the fate he had written for himself. The world outside moved on, new scandals and new figures taking center stage. But in that solitary cell, Maxwell remained a relic of a past that had long since left him behind.